Well, thank you. On behalf of the Argyle, I would like to take a moment and thank you all to our newest lecture with renowned author and world traveler, Mr. Craig Boddington here. Thank you. Believe it or not, we're thinking about today, when was the last time we had a lecture? 18 months ago. 18 months ago. So this is the first lecture in person we've had in the past 18 months, so thank you all for attending in person. Yes. Before we continue, I'd like to take a moment and extend our gratitude to our very own member, Mr. Bob Brauback here, for introducing our speaker tonight, so thank you. And perhaps you'd like to share a couple of comments with us tonight. But before we do so, if anybody wishes to purchase a book, we have sent website information to your email addresses, so please look it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. It's my pleasure to welcome Craig Boddington tonight to the Argyle Club to give the first live lecture. You know, when you look at his resume as an author, a sportsman, conservationist, a hunter, and his military service record is very impressive. Starting when he was first an Eagle Scout, I think that got him interested in outdoor life, and going to University of Kansas on a ROTC scholarship, graduating as a Marine officer. And then from there, he started writing. And he's a prolific writer. In fact, Mr. Boddington has over 5,000 publications in magazine articles. He has over 35 books that he's published. And he's continuing to write. He's a writer for SCI Journal. Had a new article last week. So his writing is really an important tool for all of us that are going on safaris or adventures. He also is very recognized as a hunting expert and a conservationist. He has the Cochran Award, a very high-level award, the Weatherby Award, given by Dallas Safari Club to the top safari hunter of the year. He has the Malik Award for the top hunter in the Pacific. He's not just active in Africa, he's active in the Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, and a number of other awards as leading conservationist. Then you look at his military service, where he graduated after going to University of Kansas as a Marine officer, and spent 31 years in the military service as a highly decorated Marine, retired after 31 years after serving in Kuwait, Iraq, and the Middle East. So he not only has a distinguished career in the hunting, conservationist, and writing, but also as a Marine officer. So it's a real pleasure we have Mr. Boddington with us tonight. Thank you, Craig.
Great to be back in San Antonio. What a wonderful city, and it's a great honor for me to be here. And really appreciate y'all braving the dread virus to be out tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about African travel and conservation, and that's really rather different subjects. So we're going to start with travel, and probably take just a short break to answer any questions then before we move on to the conservation side. Now let's see if this thing actually works. There we go. The first thing you have to understand about Africa is it's a very, very, very big place. It has an odd shape, so it doesn't really fit very well on a screen, but Africa is bigger than it looks on the map, and it's also a very, 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 very complex country. Let's see, that's it. Pandemic travel is kind of miserable. I'm curious, how many of y'all have been out of the United States since all of this started? Not too many. We stayed home for a year. And then decided it was time to get back to work and get on with our lives. The most miserable thing about it is having to travel in the mask. And to go to Africa, you know, you're going to have a 14-hour flight, and you might have a 16-hour or an 18-hour flight. And yep, you're going to have to be masked, and so you have to be prepared for that. We had actually just gotten off the plane in the Johannesburg airport in July after about an 18-hour flight. Whoop, Uh-oh, what have I done? Nope. All right. We're not going to hit that button again. But this is the O.R. Tambo Airport in Johannesburg early in the morning. And this is the departure head. You can see that it's kind of a little bit empty. Yeah, it's kind of a little bit empty. The guy that runs my website and my endorsed outfitter system lives in Montana, and he'd not been wearing the mask hardly at all. And he was going to go to South Africa a few months ago to check out an outfitter for us, and he hadn't really thought it through. He got from Montana to Dallas, and I think that just about killed him. And he was actually boarding a Qatar Airlines flight to go to Doha, and he had the mask on, and he's miserable. And as he walked down the gangplank, they handed him a plastic shield. Well, they didn't bother to tell him that he only had to wear it until they closed the doors. He thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to wear this thing for the next 14 hours. And the poor guy got seated in the plane and had a complete panic attack and wound up climbing over the seats and get out. And they tried to talk him back on. He said, I'm done, I'm going home. And he didn't even go. So you do have to kind of think it through a little bit. There's a major U.S. airport, a parking lot during the pandemic. Good heavens, lots of parking places. You won't see that. The easiest way to get to Africa today is probably through the Middle East and bypassing Europe, especially as things are, before things were really starting to open up. Turkish Airlines through Istanbul, Emirates, Air Qatar through Doha. Those are all great ways to get there, but you won't see the Istanbul airport quite that empty again. I hope not in our lifetimes. And of course, that's what a lot of the airlines have been looking like. Things are changing fast. That's the San Francisco airport, a little bit empty. But things really are opening up now, and things are changing very, very quickly. And the thing about travel is, if you're going to travel, you've really got to. That will be the only politically incorrect slide I will show you tonight. I promise. I promise. Yeah, we live part of the year in California, so we can't help ourselves. But in our little town of Paso Robles, we actually made national news because we were the little town that wouldn't shut down. The sheriff refused to enforce, and the businesses refused to comply, and we made it through one way or another. But especially for international travel, the devil really is in the details. Now, I'm neither pro-vaccine, I'm not anti-vaccine, but that little vaccine card, unfortunately, is going to become increasingly important for international travel. That's just the way it is. Whether you believe in it or not, they don't care. Doesn't matter. Rules are going to be the rules. You really have to plan ahead, because now every country has different rules, and the rules change. Some countries say that you have to have a negative COVID test 96 hours before you get on a plane. Zimbabwe is going to be 48 hours before you get on the plane. Most common is 72 hours. And I actually went to Africa 3 times this year, which is unusual. But hey, I stayed home for a year, so I owed it to myself. But 72 hours is what I've run into. But you really need to think that through, because your COVID test will be date stamped at the actual time that the specimen was taken. And so that needs to be whether it's 48, 72, 96. In my case, it's been 72. That needs to be 72 hours from the departure, not 73, not 74, because they'll look at it. And you actually need to make sure that you actually have a hard copy a hard copy of the test. It's perfectly fine to have it on your phone. That's good. Some airlines will accept that, some won't, but you really want to make sure you're able to print a hard copy. Now, it takes a little bit of planning, because supposing you want to fly on a Monday, maybe you can't get a test on a Sunday, or if the Monday is a federal holiday, maybe you can't, maybe that day's not going to work. So as you're planning travel, you really need to think it through and look ahead. In order to get back into the United States, you have to have another COVID test, and they, generally speaking, they want the PCR test. The rapid test is usually not adequate. Sir?
Can you cross at Reynosa without a test?
I don't know. Can you cross at Reynosa without a test? Probably. Probably. If you fly to Mexico, you're going to have a test.
To get in?
Yes, to get in. And in most cases, well, really in all cases, to get back into the United States, you're going to have another negative test. Now, that was what I was probably the most worried about, because the guy, we went to Uganda in March, and I kept pressing him. I said, you know, are you sure we can get this test? And he said, got it handled, I got it handled. And, you know, the tour operators, whether they're outfitters or photo safari operations, whatever, they are handling it because they have to. It's just another detail that these people are taking care of. So they're handling it, but you have to make sure that you've thought that through and that it's arranged. Now, a shortcut here in this country is they have testing facilities set up in most of the big airports. Our little town, no. San Antonio, I can't speak to, but Dallas, Houston, LAX, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, the big airports in the United States all have testing facilities. Now, I've gotten my test by doing a drive-in at CVS. Rite Aid does it. But the airports are another way you can do it. And in the airports, again, because they have to, you'll get the results back very, very quickly. Of course, it's a racket. They're expensive. That's part of the deal. I know we have a number of doctors here, so my apologies to y'all, but there's some folks doing very well off Mr. COVID. And overseas as well. I mean, I really have always thought you could trust people in the medical profession to be professional, right? So here we are in Uganda, driving from the north, the Karamoja district, back to Kampala. And I know that when we get there, we have to have a COVID test, and we have to make sure we have results before we get on the plane. So we're driving down the road. Idi Amin was not the greatest leader the world has ever seen, but he was actually very good for schools. Literacy is very, very high in Uganda. And he was also great for communications. He built towers all over the place. Cell phones didn't exist in his day, but they've converted them. Uganda has the best cell phone coverage I've ever seen in the world. Very strange. So we're driving down the road. We get good cell coverage. So pull over and said, okay, let me take a picture of your passport. Send it on. Said, okay, when we get to Kampala, you'll need to $150 cash, East only cash, for your COVID test. Fine. Okay, so here's $150. My wife and I, $300. And so we get to Kampala. Fine. And say, okay, where do we go to get the nose swab? We were actually handed negative COVID tests. Yeah, so that sort of odd stuff is going on. But you do have to think through the details. And the other problem is we all have to understand there are risks here, because what if it comes out positive? You're going to be there. You're going to be there for a while. So you really have to think it through and really analyze in your mind what are the risks and what are we going to do and how valuable is your time. You know, most of you folks have been staying home, which I think is responsible. I haven't been caught yet, and I don't expect to be, but you know, it could happen, and you're going to be quarantined for a while. Simple as that. That was the view from my first camp in Africa. I was very young. I was just absolutely obsessed by Africa when I was a kid. I wanted to get there so bad, so I started saving my pennies, and I think I was 24 when I went the first time. And we were well up on the slopes of Mount Kenya above Nanyuki, the beautiful mountain. In the Kikuyu language, it's Karanyaga, which is the home of God or God's house. Beautiful, beautiful place. That was, yeah, I was a kid then. That was our first camp in Kenya back in 1977. Now, I went to Africa the first time just so I could get out of my system once and for all. That didn't work very well. I think I've been something like 120 times. So I'm totally fascinated by the place, and I love it. Now, anybody want to ask anything else about travel? And then we're going to turn to conservation.
Craig, do you like Global Rescue or Ripcord?
I'm with Global Rescue. I think they're fine. I mean, I'm sure that the coverage is equal. No issue with Ripcord at all, but I've been with Global Rescue for quite some time, and they're great folks. The thing you have to understand about Africa is Africa's problem is people. This was a remote strip in the middle of the Cameroon forest, and half a dozen of the villagers came out to see the plane because they don't get a lot of visitors. And this is really Africa's problem, and this is the biggest problem that African wildlife faces is human overpopulation, because that translates to two things. It translates to loss of habitat, and it also translates to an awful lot of hungry people. This was the middle of absolute nowhere in southern Tanzania, right on the Mozambique border, and we stopped by for a second and the kids gathered. Africa has a lot of people. There are 54 countries. Each of it has its own unique culture, and 1.3 billion humans. And that is a dramatic population increase in our lifetimes. It's not true to say that it's wall-to-wall people, but this is really Africa's biggest problem, and African wildlife's biggest problem because of the human overpopulation. You have, it's a very, very big place, but you have vast swaths of the continent where there is literally no wildlife remaining whatsoever. It's all been eaten, just not there. And so you have to really understand that. And of course, each country is different, and each country has its own unique problems. Poaching is a major issue. The next couple of slides are a little bit disturbing, but hungry people are going to eat, and they're very effective at it. This is an anti-poaching patrol with a few forest dikers that they've taken that have just been snared. That's Burkina Faso, homemade muzzle loaders and some dried meat that they've just confiscated. In Mozambique, one of the favorite methods of poaching is what we would call a bear trap. Over there they call them gin traps. And there's actually a cottage industry making these out of old car springs. And they turn them out by the thousands. That's very disturbing. This poor young eland has a leg hold trap on one leg, and they've obviously tried to finish it with two axes unsuccessfully. It's very sad. Mozambique, very near the Gorongosa National Park, these are all gin traps. Every single one of them. These are the gin traps they collected in the bush in their first season. As they were just trying to get things going, there's hundreds of them. Obviously, the next year there'll be a few less. But poaching for meat is a very, very serious problem. Now, in the 70s and 80s, the primary poaching was for elephant ivory and rhino horn. And we've all heard about this, of course. And it really eradicated both species from vast swaths of Africa. But the biggest problem today with the burgeoning human population is meat poaching, the bushmeat trade. And they're very good at it. They're relentless. Yep. There's been a new wave of elephant poaching since the economic downturn in 2009. The elephants were really starting to recover nicely in many parts of Africa in the early 2000s. But a new wave of poaching hit hard after the economic downturn in 2009, 2010. And the African elephant population has really plummeted in the last 10 years. In 2000, 2005, there might have been 700,000 elephants in Africa, possibly wild elephants, possibly as many as 1 million. In just 10 years, there's probably something north of 500,000 wild elephants left in Africa. They're vanished from vast portions of former range. But that doesn't mean that they're threatened everywhere. Elephants are huge beasts, and they're very, very destructive feeders. Zimbabwe has an overpopulation of elephant. South Africa has elephants in virtually all the habitat that can sustain elephants. Namibia has very dry country, has relatively little elephant habitat, but they probably have about all the elephants they have room for. Botswana is a special case. Botswana has about 250,000 elephants, about half of the entire continent's total in just that one country. And elephants are highly destructive feeders. They love to push over trees. Botswana has been grossly overpopulated with elephants for 30 years. The Chobe National Park in northern Botswana today looks very much like the surface of the moon. Now, we don't know what the long-term effects were of places like Sudan or even Kenya that used to have thousands upon thousands of elephants and now have almost none. We don't know what those effects are, but we also don't know what the long-term effects of too many elephants in certain areas are going to be. These are a big herd of elephant around a baobab tree. I believe this is in the Zambezi Valley. Kind of interesting because until about 1952, it was thought that elephants would never eat the baobab tree. Never disturb them. They thought they would never eat them. And they found the first one, and that was their first indication that elephants were starting to be overpopulated in the Zambezi Valley. Now, you won't find a baobab tree that hasn't been hit by elephants. You just simply won't see one. So we don't know what those long-term effects might be of too many elephant. You know, here in Texas, and in Kansas where I'm from, hey, the farmers complain bitterly if you have a couple dozen deer in your cornfield. What about 100 elephants? And the thing we have to understand about rural Africa is we view the elephants as a great resource. We view them as beautiful animals. We go to the parks to see them. To the rural African, they're a dangerous menace. They don't look at it the same way we do because they have to live with them. They have absolutely no choice. And they are very destructive feeders. That's obviously a hut that was destroyed overnight by elephants. And it's not just the elephants. They view the antelope species as food, but they view the great cats as an extremely dangerous menace. They have a little different mindset than we do, and the only way it works is some way or other the wildlife has to pay its way. I can assure you that no African government sent out any COVID relief checks. Didn't happen. So where we're down to now with this huge human population and really vast parts of Africa where the wildlife, all wildlife is literally gone, is the African wildlife today is in protected enclaves. It's not out in the miles and miles of bloody Africa that Ruark and Hemingway wrote about, because that's gone. That's gone. The wildlife that remains today is pretty much in protected enclaves. It may be private land, it may be parks and reserves, or it may be wild areas like the Zambezi Valley that have been set aside for wildlife and where human habitation is not permitted. Happens to be Etosha National Park in Namibia, one of my favorite and most beautiful places on earth. And of course, there's the wild Zambezi Valley. They're still wild places, but some way or other, the animals have got to pay their way. And the great parks are absolutely fantastic. Again, Etosha is one of my favorite places, but that's Murchison Falls National Park in Uganda. Just a beautiful, beautiful place. The parks are wonderful. And look, everybody knows I'm a hunter, right? That's not a big secret, okay? I know many of you are not. Doesn't matter. The African parks are wonderful, and phototourism is a wonderful way to make the wildlife pay its keep. Absolutely. And, you know, I spend a lot of time in national parks because if you want to see hard to spot animals like leopards, you need to be in national parks. If you want to see beautiful lions, you're not going to see them out in the wild Africa, or usually not in the hunting areas. You'll see them in the national parks. It happens to be Etosha. And the national parks have been developed, but here's the secret. Most of the national parks are in unusual areas, especially scenic areas, especially beautiful areas, areas that have a lot of species diversity and also have a concentration of wildlife. And you don't find that everywhere. That's Murchison Falls, wonderful place to see buffalo. I'm sure that would have been the world record Nile buffalo, fantastic bull. But of course, all wildlife in national parks is well protected, as it should be.
May I ask a question before you go?
Sure.
What's the difference between that previous slide, the Nile buffalo, and the Southern Cape buffalo? Are they as big, or?
The Nile buffalo tends to be a little smaller. As you go north in Africa, you have the Southern Cape buffalo, which is the biggest, and then you go Nile buffalo is next, and then as you go west across Africa, they get smaller and smaller, till eventually you reach the dwarf forest buffalo that only weighs about 600 pounds.
And just as an example, what would be one country in which they're in the dwarf?
The Cameroon and Congo Republic. If you want to see animals like the black rhino, you're going to need to go to a national park or a very well protected piece of private land. And of course, you know, within those confines, these are wild animals. You don't want to get too close, right?
I can attest to that.
And then, you know, parks are one thing, and we also have, Africa also has a lot of protected reserves that are not hunted. The Okavango Delta in Botswana is certainly one of them, an absolutely gorgeous place. Until about 10 years ago, there were also hunting camps in the Okavango. It's been well taken care of for many years, but truly one of the great wonders of the world. The Okavango is so special, and it's not hunted today. It's a reserve, but a very, very lucrative phototourism industry there, because it is such a special place. It's such a special place. It is just so beautiful. Very, very lucrative photo safari industry there in the Okavango. And that, of course, is going to ensure its future, right? That's going to protect the wildlife and make sure they're there. The Okavango is a very, very special place. All of the major species are there. It's just fantastic. But there's also a sustainable use alternative. And the problems are the same. The animals have to be protected. There has to be a way to make the wildlife pay its way, because in a third world economy, if it can't pay, it's not going to stay. Botswana is a country, again, with a huge population of elephants and overpopulation of elephants. Botswana closed hunting in 2013. They reopened again 3 months ago. They thought that they could turn the entire country into a photo safari camp like the Okavango Delta. Not going to work, because interior Botswana, central Botswana, folks, it's just plain ugly. It's not pretty country. Tremendous numbers of elephants, but very, very little species diversity. There's not much to see there. It's dry country, it's arid country. After just a couple of years of hunting being closed, the locals are complaining there's no jobs, there's no money, there's no meat being distributed. Where are these photographers that you promised us? Well, they didn't show, because all of Botswana isn't like the Okavango Delta. So Botswana is a hunting country again. And again, they have a tremendous overpopulation of elephant. It's very well managed. It's incredibly well controlled. The Botswana Defense Force has, they have the mission for anti-poaching. There is no poaching problem in Botswana. Botswana really doesn't have most of Africa's problems. The human population is very, very low. I want to say about 2.5 million right now in a country bigger than Texas. A lot of wildlife. And again, the Botswana Defense Force has the mission for anti-poaching. When we were in Somalia with the UN, the Botswana Defense Force was the best of all the multinational forces. Give them a mission, they were going to do it, and these are not people you mess with. The rule in Botswana for poachers is absolutely shoot on sight, no questions asked. They're brutal and they do a good job. But central Botswana, again, is not like the Okavango. It's not especially pretty country, and it has very little species diversity. What there is mostly now, after 30 years of gross overpopulation, what they have mostly now is elephants. And so many elephants that all the other species have suffered because of it. When I was there in the 80s, this was the land of buffalo. You'd see buffalo all day long, multiple herds a day, lots of lion, lots of sable antelope, lots of kudu. Today, what you see in central Botswana is elephants, because nothing can compete with an elephant. They need 500 pounds of leafy forage every day, and the Botswana elephants are the biggest on the continent. A bull might weigh 7 tons, 14,000 pounds. They're huge. So they're hunting Botswana again, and they're doing a good job. Very, very carefully managed. Out of a herd of about 250,000, they might take 300 elephants a year. That's it. And if you do the percentage, that's a much smaller percentage than here in Texas we take of our white-tailed deer. And of course, the meat is always going to be utilized. Very important that we understand that with African hunting, the meat is always, always utilized. And when an elephant is taken, an entire village will gather. And when they're done, there won't even be a wet spot left on the ground. But it is a very, very carefully managed harvest, and they're doing a good job. But the area that I really wanted to spend time on is a place where I've spent a lot of time the last 15 years. And that's the Mirameo Delta, the Mirameo Reserve in the Zambezi Delta in Mozambique. So it's a very interesting place. It's another area that has absolutely no chance to be a photo safari area. It's hot, it's not very pretty. Species diversity isn't bad, but it's limited. And we'll zero in on that because what they've done there is really unique on the whole continent. Now, this is Mozambique. On the map of Africa, it looks like a very small country, but there are no small countries in Africa. Mozambique is 1,000 miles top to bottom, averages about 350 miles east to west. So it's not a small country. It's situated, again, there's an outline of Mozambique, and this is where the Zambezi River comes down out of Zambia here, Zimbabwe here, Malawi over here, flows down here. This is the town of Beira. This is the Gorongosa National Park. And the Maramea Reserve is kind of right here at the mouth of the Zambezi River. The reserve itself is protected, and it's actually administered by the World Wildlife Fund. The area, the reserve itself is surrounded by 4 numbered hunting areas. Cutada in Portuguese means hunting area. It's surrounded by Cutadas 10, 11, 12, and 14. The World Wildlife Fund and the hunting operators work together in absolute perfect harmony, and they've all done a very, very good job with this area. Wasn't always so. In 1970, there were estimated to be 40,000 buffalo in and around the Maramea Reserve. The Portuguese pulled out very quickly in 1975, and immediately a long and bitter civil war started. And it lasted nearly 20 years. There was a partial ceasefire in 1988, an effective ceasefire by 1992, and Mozambique as we know it today was really formed in 1995. But safari operators went into this area safely in 1992, and from 40,000 buffalo in 1970, they figure there might have been 1,200 left. During the long Civil War, wildlife was used to feed both sides, both factions, and poached ivory was used to arm both sides. They were selling it for war weapons, probably to the Chinese. And then the Russians had an even better idea. The Russians parked refrigerator ships out in the bay, and they used helicopters to machine gun the buffalo, pick them up with the helicopters, take them out to the refrigerator ship, and take them back to Mother Russia. So when they started re-exploring and reopening this area, there were somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 buffalo remaining. They started protecting the area, working effective anti-poaching, collecting all the gin traps that I showed you. And the aerial survey this year should show 30,000 buffalo in this area. Fantastic. And although elephant poaching has been very severe in Mozambique for the last 10 years, this particular area, because it's well protected, is the only area in Mozambique where elephants are actually increasing. Now, we're talking drop in the bucket. In 1970, there were probably 100,000 elephants in Mozambique, possibly twice that. Today, there's maybe 20,000. And in this particular area, there's only about 500 elephants. But they actually are increasing because they're protected. Again, would be wonderful if this area could be a photo safari area. But it's not. It's not suitable. It's not particularly pretty. And I tell you what, this is the swamps of the Zambezi. It is brutally hot. I've seen it 130 out there. No shade anywhere, unless, of course, you bring your own. It helps a little bit. But the buffalo are there, and they're there again. They're back. And it's simply because since 1992, they have very, very carefully managed this area, and all the conservation efforts in this particular area are entirely supported by hunters and by hunting, with the World Wildlife Fund administering it. I don't know how many buffalo you would have in a herd like this, where you have 5 or 6 buffalo deep, but it went horizon to horizon. 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, I have no idea. but you don't necessarily just walk up and try to pet them. Getting to them is a whole different deal, and you're probably going to get your feet a little bit wet. Sir?
Did they get rid of the landmines that they used to have right on the border?
Yes. They were very, very lucky. This area was not mined very much. It's a long ways from the border. It's actually in the center of the country. There was not much mining. Yes, it's been clean for many years. All over Mozambique, there was a lot of demining. But this area, that's what enabled them to start so early in 1992, is there was very little mining in this area. That was a blessing they had. And in order to get close to the buffalo, eventually you're going to get down on your hands and knees. So that's why I say this is probably not a successful photo safari area. But it's a very successful hunting area because we hunters are absolutely crazy. We'll do this stuff, all right? We don't care. Yeah, we'll walk as far as we have to. We'll get our feet as wet as we need to. And that's an advantage. And eventually you will get into the buffalo. And that is really my favorite African animal. Spent a lot of time with them. And I love this area in Mozambique because you see them in just the most magnificent big herds. But it's not just the buffalo. Those are sable antelope. With the sable, the females are very, very reddish brown, and only the dominant bulls have that beautiful black color. But when they started, when they reopened here in 1992, they had one sable bull on quota, and they couldn't actually find one that they judged old enough to harvest, so they didn't. Today there's about 4,000 sable antelope in the area. Common sight, every single day you'll see sable. Have become one of the most common antelope. Those are three bulls running together. They absolutely are just a beautiful, beautiful animal. That's a Nyala, which is really only found from northeastern South Africa across through Mozambique. But when they restarted in this area in 1992, they weren't even sure that Nyala still existed. There hadn't been one seen for several years. They thought they were totally gone. Turns out they weren't quite gone. Last month, when I was in this area, I saw 50 Nyala bulls in an afternoon. These are a group of Nyala. These are the females, and there's the darker bull behind. Now, if you guys are taking notes, your word for the day is sexually dimorphic, and what that means is males and females are very dissimilar in appearance, and the Nyala is actually the most sexually dimorphic of all the antelope. They don't even look like they're the same species. Very interesting. But there's plenty of them again today, and just 40 years ago, they actually thought they were all gone. But they built back up. They've done a wonderful job. Unlike a lot of areas, Mozambique has very, very few indigenous rarities, meaning animals that are not found anyplace else. This is the Selous zebra. The Selous zebra is a slightly smaller zebra. They, like the common zebra, will have shadow stripes of gray between the black and white. The Selous zebra is a little bit smaller, and they're stark black and white skins, an absolutely beautiful zebra. They're only found in this part of Mozambique today. They did occur in Malawi. They're extinct in Malawi. When they restarted this area in 1992, they thought there might have been 25 of them left. Today there's about 800. They do harvest a couple of them a year, but they build it back from absolutely nothing, almost gone, to more than 800. Again, just a tremendous, tremendous, tremendous conservation miracle. And it's not easy. It's done through enthusiastic and well-trained anti-poaching patrols, and it's part of what the professional hunters do is they train them, and part of what we hunters do is we equip them. We make sure that they have proper uniforms, proper equipment, good training. In Mozambique, we've equipped them with motorbikes, and they do a wonderful job. They absolutely do. It's really through anti-poaching that has created this miracle, because there are villages in the area and they're going to poach. So in just a few years, they've gone from collecting this many gin traps in one season to just a few now. Just a few now. They've done a great job. They've been very, very, very effective. And the animals are back, and they really are. It's wonderful. Again, I've been in this area just about every year for the last 15 years, and although it was really in a mature state of recovery 15 years ago, even today, every year, I see it getting better and better. You just see the wildlife blossoming. And they've done more than that. In the 1970s, there were a lot of lions in the area. Nobody really knows what happened during the Civil War. But in 1992, when they reopened the area, there were almost no lions. Now, there's some leopards, but almost no lions. Nobody really knows what happened. One theory is returning villagers after the war brought some kind of feline disease with them. That's possible. Certainly they weren't poached. There was no reason to. But until very recently, we'd see the occasional track. Once in a while, you'd see a male cross through the Gorongosa National Park, about 70 miles away. Not impossible for a lion to walk that far looking for a girlfriend. But there were really almost no resident lions in the area. So this was widely publicized. But the Cabela Family Foundation funded an introduction of 24 lions. And they were brought in, they were captured in a variety of South African parks so that they would have good genetic diversity and would be able to successfully mate. They were actually released just 3 years ago. So this has been a very, very recent effort, and they started with 24. They lost one to a gin trap. They lost one to natural causes. Today there's 70. And one of the lionesses just had cubs last week. So they're increasing very, very rapidly. And so now we've got lions back in the area. It's amazing. It does change the game a little bit. Yeah, those are the lions right behind me. That's about as close as I'm going to get. Thank you very much. And you know, if you, today, I mean, we went for so many years, there aren't any lions here. You don't have to worry about it. But now today, if we step off the truck to look at a warthog or look at a sable, you better pay attention and look around because they're there. And again, in just 3 years, they've increased from the 24 original to now more than 70. It's just been a fantastic conservation success story and more. Very interesting story because coastal Mozambique really isn't ideal cheetah country. But they found an old Portuguese account from 1918. And in his diary, he actually referenced seeing a cheetah in this area. And okay, on the strength of that, they were here naturally. There hasn't been a sighting of a cheetah in this area for 103 years. So just about 2 months ago, they released 11 cheetahs into the wild in this area. And the lions at some point will probably have to be managed. Okay, that's just a fact. They did not introduce them so that they could someday be hunted, but the area can only sustain so many. But the agreement with the World Wildlife Fund is that the cheetahs will never ever be bothered. We'll see how they do. I just absolutely love cheetahs, and I've been very fortunate. You know, they're very relatively common in Namibia, scattered populations in South Africa, a few in Zimbabwe, but they're pretty scarce continent-wide. On my first trip to Africa, and of course they're totally protected virtually everywhere, On my first trip to Africa in Kenya, I saw this group of 6 cheetahs, and I've been lucky. I've seen them in a lot of places since then. I've seen cheetahs as far west as Burkina Faso. I've seen cheetahs in the Zambezi Valley where they really shouldn't be, but they wander through. But now they've introduced them into coastal Mozambique, and these pictures were taken less than a month ago. So the cheetahs are back. Now, part of the deal is the meat that is taken is distributed to the local villages. It's distributed in village rotation. And it's kind of a big deal because this is a large area and they have a lot of buffalo, and so they take a lot of buffalo. They distribute about 7 tons of meat to the local villages in this area. And it's very ceremonious. This is the village headman, the chief, and he comes and does a ceremonial dance to bless the meat, and the people gather so that they can all get their share. And they do get their share. They make sure that the meat is properly butchered and is delivered clean. And the headman distributes to make sure that each family in the village gets a fair share. And then tomorrow they'll do another village, and the day after that they'll do another village. A very large logistical undertaking for the operators in this area, obviously. But yeah, everybody gets a share. So the meat distribution is a very, very important part of the reason why this area has been so successful. But that's really not all. Community projects are a big part of it. The kids were in an outdoor school, and so the hunters in that season built them a school. Complete with desks, complete with books. We dig wells, sink boreholes to make sure that they have clean water, which is really important and very hard to come by in many parts of rural Africa. And they keep looking for new projects, and that's really, well, I've lost a slide. Darn it, vanished. I had a stack of beehives about like this. That's the newest project, is honey. And so they've built hundreds of hives that are now scattered throughout the forested areas. A new project and a new business for the local people is making honey. It's being very, very successful so far. And that's why there's now 30,000 buffalo in the area again, which is a tremendous increase from 1992. Many of the conservation organizations have been involved with it. Dallas Safari Club has been extremely generous in this area. They funded one of the helicopters. And the helicopters are used for game counts. They're used for a rapid response anti-poaching patrol, and they're also used as medevac choppers for the locals. They run people to the clinic in Beira whenever they need to. Whenever somebody is ill or is injured, they'll run the locals to a doctor in the helicopter. And so obviously, it's not without cost. That's the grave of a game scout who was killed in a shootout with poachers. Doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. There's a constant ongoing cost to keep these areas and to keep the wildlife and enable the wildlife to continue to flourish and continue to grow. It's a whole, conservation in Africa is a brutal business, and it's a lot different than managing our white-tailed deer here in Texas. But where they're able to do it, they're doing a very, very, very good job. Thank you. Anybody have any questions? Sir.
Talk to us briefly about the migration that still exists in Africa.
Migrations that still exist in Africa. There aren't many. The Serengeti migration is absolutely the most famous in southern Kenya and northern Tanzania. That's the most famous migration. There are others. And in many areas there are mini migrations. In Namibia, southwest of Windhoek, there is an incredible migration of hartebeest and zebra and eland that occurs every year as they go from summer pasture to winter pasture. Doesn't really apply in Mozambique. It's a very, very well-watered country, and we don't really see any migrations there.
Zambia?
Not dramatic. Not dramatic. Zambia doesn't have dramatic migrations because they have major rivers running through it. It's not really the migration in Africa is usually caused by wet versus dry. And Zambia really doesn't have much of that. Ma'am?
Since the revolution in '74, when it first began with Russia taking over all their Portuguese colonies, has Angola started coming back?
You know, yes, it has. There have been so many efforts to get Angola reopened, and they've all come to naught. Angola, because of the minerals, is a very, very wealthy country, and the truth is they just don't need it. And they did. There are, however, in in Africa, I get East and West mixed up. Southeastern Angola has a tremendous number of elephant, a lot of buffalo still, and apparently very much on the increase, but the truth is very few people have been there to see it.
And they also have giant sable.
The giant sable. Yeah, they are very restricted to a small park up in the north. The last I've been able to discover, there's a couple hundred of them left. They are in a park where they're very, very well protected. The problem is the park is overpopulated with lions, and lions are eating the giant sable, which is kind of ridiculously sad. But that was the situation, and this has been a couple of years ago since I've gotten any fresh report. That is wild country up there. Yeah, very wild country. Ma'am?
Are they using drones for the anti-poaching?
Yes, they do. Yeah, they do. The winds cause a problem there. They keep losing them, but yes, they do use drones, and they're obviously very successful. And they use a lot of night vision and all the other modern tricks too. Yes.
Are they relocating some of the elephants that are overpopulating?
They haven't yet done that in Botswana. The primary reason is the incredible cost. Buffalo are hard to relocate, but buffalo from that Maramayo area have been used to jumpstart herds in other parts of Mozambique. That's one thing. But moving elephants is very, very costly. So they haven't done that yet. Now, to their credit, Botswana has never culled their elephants. They have never removed elephants in that fashion. Zimbabwe used to regularly in the thousands. But Botswana has never done that. But they're facing a problem because the elephants continue. Now, some of them are going back into Angola. And of course, they go back and forth between Zambia to the north and Zimbabwe to the east regularly. But they're facing a problem. Botswana cannot support 250,000 elephants forever. And I think that government has no idea what to do, and I don't blame them. I wouldn't either. Sir?
I guess how is the relocation of the rhinos to Texas going as far as like finding places here for the rhinos to, I guess, be moved to Texas and live, and I guess are they eventually going to go back to Africa, or?
I think that would be the hope. I understand they're doing pretty well in a lot of places now. They lost some because the forage was apparently a little too coarse for them. They lost some here and there. But I think they're generally doing well, and I think the hope is that they can go back. And in fact, there have been rhinos reintroduced from the United States in other parts of Africa, not in southern Africa, because they've still got plenty of rhinos. But there have been reintroductions of rhinos from Texas, I think from Texas, but possibly zoo stock, that have gone back to Africa, and they're doing fine. I mean, the problem is that rhino horn is so ridiculously valuable on the black market that to keep a rhino today, you almost have to have a full-time guard on it. The poaching has been brutal, especially in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, they were whooping and hollering because the white rhinos had finally gone over 20,000. Of course, rhinos are an incredibly slow breeding animal. But about 10 years ago, the white rhinos had gone over 20,000, and there was tremendous celebration. There are not 20,000 white rhinos today. The poachers have cut those numbers down quite a bit. It's just so hard to protect them. Kruger National Park in South Africa has sustained huge losses. Elephants too, but the rhino is the big ticket item, and it's really sad. The money does not exist to protect them properly, and the poachers are relentless.
Who's taking the rhino?
There is a market in the Arab world, and there is still a market in the Far East. They use them for medicinal purposes, if you will. The poaching is mostly done by local people who are willing to take the chance, and they're literally risking their lives to poach a rhino. It is shoot on sight, but they're willing to take that chance because the payoff is that big. Sir.
How do they run the logistics operation on that scale to get that many poached animals out?
It's a very, very porous border, but you know they're not keeping the meat. So a rhino horn, I could have a couple of them in here. They're basically on foot, and there's a pipeline. There's an illegal pipeline. They spend a lot of investigative effort trying to shut it down because it's really not going to do you any good to go after the individual poacher, where you have to go after the market. And it's very difficult, a lot of politics involved, but most of and elephant ivory too, most of it goes out on foot. Sir.
Talk about China sort of sneaking into a lot of these places and influencing, putting some money into those places. Have you seen that at all?
Well, yeah, I've seen it all over the place. The Chinese have incredibly infiltrated Africa. They really have. They're building roads. They built Robert Mugabe a very fancy presidential palace. They want the natural resources. China's pretty well tapped out. They want the natural resources. So they're cutting the timber. They're taking the minerals. They are a large market for both poached ivory and poached rhino horn. And they exert a lot of influence because they're willing to build roads. They're willing to build hospitals. They're willing to do things that look good, but there's a tremendous price to be paid.
Do you have any insights you could share with us about what's happening to all these concessions that have lost 2 seasons now of hunting operations? Are they being lost? Are they being...
Losses. What's happening with areas that have not had any business for the last 2 years? You know, it depends entirely on the situation. It varies tremendously. I would think that some of the government concessions in Tanzania have probably suffered horribly because there's been no money to conduct the anti-poaching. And the outfitter hasn't been there. And while the cat's away, the mice are going to play. So I'm sure that a lot of areas have suffered terribly during the pandemic. But other areas have profited. In this area, they just funded out of their own pocket. They kept the anti-poaching going. They said, we're not going to give up. We've been here for 29 years, and we're not going to let the virus beat us. And many took that attitude, but many were unable to. So it varies tremendously. Sir.
The future of gorillas in Uganda and Rwanda, they're pretty well managed right now. Do you see that the countries are going to continue to protect that very valuable resource?
I really think they will, because that is such a valuable source of tourism. And I mean, you hate to put it on that basis, but The gorillas pay their way, and therefore they're going to work very hard to make sure they stay. No gorillas, no tourists. And you know, the leaders of those countries are very, very well aware. A lot of them are very, very bright people. I think that's safe. And I mean, the Serengeti National Park is going to remain. The Kruger National Park, Etosha, the Masai Mara, the great parks of Africa, including the gorilla sanctuaries, they're going to remain as very well protected enclaves, because the Africans are very, very astute capitalists, and they're not going to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. They're really not. I do have faith in that. You let me off the hook that easy? Okay, thank you very, very much. Really appreciate it.